The excitement continues to build for the next instalment of the official Formula One game series, F1 2019. Now, a few weeks ago, you might have seen us talking about our ideal wish list for the features we'd love to see included in the game. Well, Tom Errington, who's here with me, has been very fortunate and had a chance to play an early version of F1 2019. Tom, I'm incredibly jealous of that, and we're going to get into what you've seen, the bits you got to try, what we liked, and maybe the things that were perhaps a little bit disappointing.
Yep.
But I think there's a big place that we want to start. There are two big features we already know about with the 2019 game, and that's the inclusion of Formula 2 for the first time and a new Ayrton Senna versus Alain Prost special mode, effectively.
Yep.
We'll come back to Senna versus Prost, and we'll start with Formula 2. You got a chance to try the F2 car out, have a bit of racing with it. What's it like?
So yeah, F2, I mean, that was a real shock. We know it's coming for a while, but the fact that we've been working on it for so long, finally got it in the game, great news. This is the first thing I went for when I got to play the early build. I thought, try something a bit new, and immediately forgot it was F2 and presumed it was F1. First corner, tried to put the power on, straight out of a corner, and spun. And it's that sort of thing that reminds us of something totally new and totally different. Lee Mather stood up at the front and said this is effectively a second game they've built, and he's absolutely right. They've taken an actual new car model and built it from the ground up. It's got the new physics, all the drivers, all the teams, so it is a huge undertaking. And at launch it's the 2018 season, so that's what you've got at the beginning. A few people grumbled about that, but then when they actually explain the reasoning for it, it's entirely to build into a new career mode. We've always been talking about this 10-year career mode and getting people to play on, and I did ask, by adding F2, surely you've extended that, and are you worried people are going to drop off? But the way they've got around this is to make F2 hugely important to the career. So when you choose your team and start, you have to pick a Formula One driver academy to be associated with. And on top of that, you've got these two rivals, and you've got one that will inevitably wind you up by being really irritating and criticising you, and you've got one who seemed a little bit more ambivalent. But the actions you make on the track, so you might be told by the team, get out the way your teammates quicker, and you decide, I'm going to ignore that, I'm going to carry on. That person will come confront you in the paddock, and that rivalry will stay and continue. And then when you finish the season and presumably graduate into F1, those two rivals will follow you in to Formula One as well. It might be that Vettel's sidelined at Ferrari for a while this new guy comes in. So that rivalry you've built up continues into the game, becomes a talking point throughout, as well as your teammate rivalry that's already there. So it's not just, as they said, they didn't want this to be a byline to the F1 game. They wanted it to be integral, and that's exactly what they've achieved.
So we've effectively got the first makings of almost a storyline that will be running through the career, which is a real detachment from what we've seen up to now.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of compared it to FIFA's The Journey and a few other sporting games. They kind of make these little enclosed story modes to kind of get the feel of you being that football, you being that hockey player, or whatever. And that's what they're trying to do here. The big theme of this game is rivalry, and you've got that with Prost and Senna. You touched on it a little bit last year with the teammate rivalries. They now want this to be a proper narrative throughout, because the one thing Codemasters has noticed is the things that we all talk about in F1, rivalries are one of the things we talk about the most. So why wouldn't you have it in the game?
And is that a feature that you have to progress through if you want to play the career mode, or is there the option to skip it? Because while it's potentially great for the die-hard fans, that is a potentially divisive feature. You mentioned there we'd effectively have fake drivers coming in and replacing real drivers in F2 initially, and then in F1 when you all graduate after the first season.
Yeah, I mean, we only got a window into the game and a little bit of time as developers, but I suspect, going off the way Codemasters work, they never want to exclude people from having the opportunity to do anything in the game. So I fully suspect there'll be an option, whether that's to turn F2 off or just start in F1. I'm sure there'll be an option like that.
Now, you get a chance to try out the 2019 F1 cars as well. And we've had some rule changes in the real world, which should have affected the handling of the cars a little bit. How did you find it in the game? Is there a noticeable difference?
I think if you played F1 2018, the handling model is going to be very familiar to you in most ways. Did notice that it seemed a little bit easier to close up on a car for an overtake, which is sort of the thing that drivers have talked about in real life. So there's been some very subtle changes, but nothing groundbreaking, if you like. But the one thing that does stand out enormously, and Codemasters highlighted this, they've redone their lighting model. So when you go to somewhere like Singapore or Monaco or Bahrain, as you can kind of see here, how much more photorealistic that looks. It's a real spectacle now to race at places like that, and it does feel very, very different. And certainly I was a bit distracted in the opening laps by seeing the amount of detail on the tyres with the chrome at the start, and then also how much they started to wear and appear. It's much more immersive, would be the way to describe it, rather than the experience of driving being noticeably different.
It's a good example of the level of detail that Codemasters are getting into now.
Yeah, definitely.
Just a small touch like having the chrome effect on the tyres. we all really only saw that for the first time, or we knew about it in the public when we saw the tyres in testing. And for that tiny little detail to be included in the game, it really does show the level that they're pushing to. Something else they're pushing on with is the F1 eSports offering. It's gone from strength to strength in its first couple of years, and from the impressions you got at the event you attended, it seems that Codemasters is putting a lot more effort into that for this year as well.
Yeah, and it's subtle changes, but one of my gripes with the F1 games for a while was that the menu layout was a bit of a mess and a bit tricky to find anything. This one now is much more intuitive, so if you're someone who plays the career mode constantly, that's going to appear more prominently on your home screen. If you're a multiplayer player, that's what's going to appear as well. There's a designated eSports landing page now as well, which makes the whole process of signing up much easier. And they're aware that some players will look at eSports and think, I'm not good enough, I'm not really into that. They've incentivized it a bit, so you can unlock things like custom liveries and things like that to try and encourage people to have a go, and if you're not sure you're that great. That extends in multiplayer as well. There's now like a trophy room where when you build your leagues, you can create a badge and a trophy and that sort of thing, and these things start to appear as a complement to the super license system, which has also been tweaked now to have an attendance score. So if you're someone who sets up a league and you never play in it, that's going to reflect. So when you try and join other leagues, they'll see that you're not a reliable player and that sort of thing. So they're trying to make that online experience a much more streamlined, much more enjoyable. I know certainly there's been plenty of gripes about online glitches and bugs and the rest of it, but Codemasters again has put more resource into that. They've expanded the team. They're trying to get on top of those things as well. But in terms of a face value look at it, we didn't get to play it. It looks like there's been some really good, nice tweaks.
Let's finish up then with the other big feature that we've already had the fanfare and promotion around from Codemasters, and that's this new Senna versus Prost mode, effectively. We've gone for a picture of the Prost Ferrari on the screen, mainly because that's my second favourite F1 car of all time. But how exactly is this going to work, and how much of it did you get to see when you tried the game out?
Yeah, we got a small window into it. We got to do one of these 8 head-to-head challenges, and it was really disappointing in that it was just the overtake challenge that we've seen from the classic games. The difference was when it came to that final overtake, it was Prost or Senna you hadn't raced against. But even then, they didn't race differently. They were still slower, so you just breezed past on the back straight and won the challenge. They've put so much work into getting the license. They originally tried getting Senna into the game in 2013 when they made a real effort with the classic cars and stuff like that. Conversations came too late, so they shelved it for a little while but kept talking. To finally get this level of detail and actually in this rivalry in F1 and how great it is, to then relegate it to your average classic car challenge, just sort of like a real undersell of what was possible there. Of course, there's 7 other challenges. It might just be that's one done in 8, but to show us that as a reveal was a little bit disappointing.
And is there still the chance to race the 1990 Ferrari and McLaren in amongst the other classic cars as we could last year?
Yeah, I believe it's being added to the roster as well. So if you get the early edition, you'll get that in the 2010 special cars as well, which is a little bit of a celebration of Codemasters being the makers of the game for 10 years now.